I never imagined that the worst moment of my life would happen on a Sunday afternoon in November, at a table I had set myself, in a house I had helped pay for. My son-in-law's name is Derek. I want you to remember that name, because for a long time, I tried very hard to forget it. It was Thanksgiving. Not just any Thanksgiving. It was the first one after my husband Robert passed. 14 months earlier, Robert had died quietly in the bedroom of our house in Oakville, Ontario. The same house we'd lived in for 31 years. He went in his sleep, which people kept telling me was a blessing, and I kept nodding like I agreed, because what else do you do? The truth is, there is no good way to lose the person you built your entire life beside. There is just loss, and then the long, strange work of continuing. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter, because that's what she is. That's all she's ever been to me. Her name is Fiona. She's 41 years old. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either a blessing or a curse, depending on the day. She married Derek 9 years ago at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I remember standing in the back of that ceremony, thinking he seemed like a decent enough man. Quiet. A little too comfortable being the most important person in whatever room he walked into. But I thought, that's not my call to make. She loves him. That's enough. I was wrong about that, about a lot of things. After Robert died, I was alone in that house for the first time in over 3 decades. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. It was the kind of hard that sits in your chest like a stone you can't move. My daughter called every few days. My son, my younger child, whose name is Graham. He drove up from Hamilton every other weekend for the first few months. They were good to me. I want to be clear about that. This story is not about bad children. It's about what happens when one person in a marriage decides, slowly and quietly, that they don't like the way the power is arranged. In February, about 4 months after Robert passed, Fiona called me and asked if I would consider helping them out financially. They were trying to renovate their home in Mississauga, the kitchen, mainly, and the basement. Derek had recently started his own landscaping company, and cash flow was tight. She was careful about how she said it. She used words like bridge and temporary and just until the business finds its footing. I said yes without even thinking about it very long, because she was my daughter, and because Robert had left us comfortable, and because I could not think of a single better use for that money than helping my child. I gave them $40,000. I want to say that number plainly because it matters to the rest of this story. $40,000 transferred out of my savings account in 2 installments, documented with a simple written agreement that my accountant suggested I draw up. A loan, technically interest-free, repayable when the business was stable. Fiona signed it. Derek signed it. We had dinner afterward at an Italian place on the lakeshore, and Derek ordered a bottle of wine I later realized cost $240, and I told myself that was fine. That was just Derek being Derek. By the time Thanksgiving came around, I had also co-signed a line of credit for the landscaping business. $60,000 of borrowing capacity. My name on the paperwork. My credit history, which I had kept spotless for 40 years, sitting behind Derek's ambitions like a guarantee. I tell you this not to sound foolish. I tell you this because I need you to understand what I was carrying when I walked into that house on that Sunday afternoon in November. I arrived at 2:30, same as I'd been told. I had driven 40 minutes in light rain from Oakville with a Le Creuset Dutch oven full of roasted squash soup in the back seat because it had been Robert's favorite and I thought it might make the table feel a little more like family. I had been nervous all week, not in a way I could explain easily, just a low hum of something not quite right, the way the air feels before a storm you can't see yet. The house smelled like roasting turkey. Fiona met me at the door. She hugged me, but there was something clicked about it. Something she was managing. I told myself I was imagining things. The dining room had been rearranged. The table was larger. They must have borrowed leaves from somewhere, and there were already people seated around it. Derek's parents, whom I had met maybe 4 times over 9 years, were at the far end. His mother, a woman named Barbara, who has always looked at me like I am a minor inconvenience in an otherwise reasonable universe. His father, quiet and retired, who I will say nothing unkind about because I have nothing unkind to say. Two of Derek's brothers with their families. And then a woman I didn't recognize sitting in the chair I had mentally noted, without even thinking about it, as mine. The chair at the corner closest to the kitchen. The one with the good sightline to the window. I set down the Dutch oven and looked at Fiona. She was busy with something at the counter, not looking at me. I pulled out the chair next to the one that was occupied. And that's when Derek came in from the garage. He stood in the doorway in a flannel shirt and looked at me pulling out that chair, and he said, and I want to be precise because I have replayed this moment more times than I can count. He said, "Actually, I was hoping you'd sit over there." And he gestured to a folding chair that had been placed at the very end of the table, wedged between the wall and the edge. No proper placement, no real space. The kind of spot you put the extra child when the adult table overflows. That seat's for my mum. She needs to be near the kitchen because of her hip. I looked at Barbara. Barbara was already seated at the other end of the table near the window, not near the kitchen, not anywhere near where her hip would need her to be. I said, of course, because in that moment with all those eyes on me, I simply could not find the other words. I sat in the folding chair. My daughter still hadn't looked up. We got through Grace. We got through the serving of the turkey. I sat with my knees angled sideways because there wasn't enough room to face the table straight on, and I made conversation with Derek's younger brother's wife, who was perfectly pleasant and had no idea what had just happened, and I ate food I couldn't taste and smiled until my face ached. It was halfway through the meal that I excused myself to use the bathroom. I stood in the hallway bathroom with the door locked and the fan running, and I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I thought about Robert. I thought about what he would have said. He would have taken Derek aside. He would have been quiet and very clear. Robert was good at that, making things plain without raising his voice. But Robert wasn't there, and I was 63 years old, standing in my daughter's bathroom trying not to cry. And there was $40,000 in an unsigned repayment history, and $60,000 of my credit attached to a landscaping company that I was no longer sure I trusted. I made a decision in that bathroom, not an angry decision, a clear one. I dried my face. I went back to the table. I ate the rest of the meal. I said thank you when it was time to say thank you, helped clear the plates, kissed my grandchildren on their heads. Fiona walked me to my car. I could see she wanted to say something, but she didn't, and I didn't push. I said I'd had a lovely time. I drove home in the rain. That night, I called my accountant. His name is Harold, and he has been handling my finances since 1998. I told him what I needed. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Give me until Wednesday." I also called my lawyer, a woman named Louise who had helped me and Robert update our wills 3 years before. I told her I needed to review the loan agreement and the co-signing paperwork. She said she could see me Thursday morning. By Friday of that week, I had initiated a formal demand for repayment on the $40,000 loan. Under the terms of the agreement both Fiona and Derek had signed, I was within my rights to call the loan due with 60 days' notice if I had reasonable concern about the borrower's financial stability. Harold had pulled Derek's business filings. The landscaping company had reported a loss in its first year and was projecting marginal profit in year 2. Reasonable concern was not a stretch. The co-signing was more complicated. Louise explained that I couldn't simply remove myself from the line of credit without the bank's consent and Derek's cooperation. But I could, and did, contact the bank directly to flag that I was no longer willing to extend further financial support and to request a review of the guarantor arrangement. The bank called Derek the following Monday. His availability on that line of credit was frozen pending review. I want to tell you what that week felt like, because it was not what you might expect. It wasn't satisfying, exactly. It was heavy. There were moments when I picked up the phone to call Fiona and put it back down. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was being too hard, whether the folding chair was really worth all of this, whether I was making the money about something that was really about grief, about Robert, about the fact that Thanksgiving without him was already going to break me a little, and Derek had just helped it break faster. But then I would remember the way he gestured toward that folding chair, that casual, easy gesture, like I was furniture to be arranged. And I would remember that Fiona had not looked up from the counter. And I would know that this was not about one chair at one table. This was about what happens when you are quiet too long and someone mistakes your quiet for permission. Fiona called me on the Wednesday after the bank contacted Derek. She was not calm. She said I was being vindictive. She said I had embarrassed the family. She said Derek was devastated, which I found interesting, because Derek had not yet called me himself. She said she couldn't believe I would do something like this over a seating arrangement, and I said, very carefully, that I wasn't doing it over a seating arrangement. I was doing it because $40,000 of my savings and $60,000 of my credit had been borrowed on the understanding that I was valued in this family, and what happened at Thanksgiving had made that understanding unclear. She hung up. Graham called me 2 days later. He'd heard from Fiona. He was careful. He always is, Graham. He measures his words. And he said he wasn't taking sides, but he wanted to understand what had happened. So I told him. I told him about the soup I had made, because it was his father's favorite. I told him about the chair. I told him about the hallway bathroom and the mirror and the decision. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Mum, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that happened." That was all I needed, actually. Just that. In the weeks that followed, Derek made 2 attempts to reach me. The first was a text message that said he hoped we could move forward and that he had never intended to cause offense. I didn't respond. The second was a phone call I let go to voicemail. He said the business was in a difficult position and he needed time to sort out the financial situation. He sounded, for the first time in 9 years, genuinely unsettled. The 60-day repayment notice expired in January. By that point, Derek had sold 2 of the company's commercial trailers to cover part of the loan. He'd also had to personally renegotiate his line of credit at a higher interest rate without my guarantee. Harold told me he'd done it. It took time and cost him, but he'd managed it. I didn't take pleasure in that exactly, but I did feel something settle, some small and stubborn thing that had been clenched in my chest since that Sunday in November. The real change, though, came later, not in the finances, in Fiona. She came to Oakville in February, alone, on a Saturday morning. She knocked on the door, and when I opened it, she looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks, which, to be honest, she probably hadn't. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had done homework as a teenager, and she looked at her mug for a long time before she spoke. She said she knew she had let something happen at Thanksgiving that she shouldn't have. She said she had known it was wrong before I even arrived. That Derek had rearranged the seating and she'd told him it wasn't a good idea. And he told her I wouldn't notice. And she had let him win that argument because she was tired of fighting him on small things. She said she'd been letting him win a lot of small things for a while now, and she was starting to understand that the small things had added up into something large. She didn't ask me to drop the loan repayment. She didn't ask for anything. She just sat there and said she was sorry, and that she missed her father, and that she was frightened about her marriage in a way she hadn't said out loud to anyone yet. I reached across the table and took her hand. We sat there for a long time. The tea went cold. Neither of us moved to warm it up. I want to be honest about what came next because it isn't a tidy resolution. Fiona and Derek are still together. They went to couples counseling for several months. Fiona told me this herself, without my asking. Derek has not apologized to me directly. He may never. I've accepted that more or less. What I have not accepted, and will not accept, is the idea that the way he treated me that day was something I needed to absorb and move past quietly, the way women of my generation were so often taught to do. My mother would have sat in that folding chair and said nothing. I used to think I was like my mother. It turns out I'm not. I am back at Fiona's table now. Not literally. I mean that our relationship is repaired, slowly and imperfectly, the way real things repair. Last Easter, we had dinner together, and I sat in a proper chair, and Fiona made her father's squash soup from the recipe I gave her years ago, and my grandchildren sat across from me with gravy on their shirts, and I thought about Robert, and allowed myself to cry a little in the car on the way home. But they were not bad tears. The $40,000 was repaid in full by March. I put it back into savings. I have not co-signed anything for anyone since, and I don't intend to. I am 63 years old. I have buried a husband. I have raised 2 children. I have kept my name clean on every piece of paper I have ever signed. And I have learned, later than I should have, but not too late, that love is not the same thing as being available to be diminished. If you are sitting in a folding chair right now, not literally, maybe, but in the way that matters, I hope this is useful to you. I hope you know that getting up from that chair is not the end of anything. Sometimes it is the only way something real can begin. I've thought a lot about why I didn't say anything at that table, not just in the moment, but for the weeks afterward, when people might have expected me to feel vindicated, or at least lighter. The truth is, it's more complicated than that. What Derek did that Thanksgiving was small, in the way that only the cruelest things can be small. A gesture, a folding chair, a lie about his mother's hip, and yet it carried the full weight of everything he'd decided I was: someone who could be moved aside without consequence, someone whose silence could be counted on. What I've come to understand is that every action like that one carries a cost, even when the person doing it doesn't see the bill coming. Derek had borrowed not just my money, but my trust, my name, my credit history built over 40 years of careful living. He'd taken those things, and then, at the first opportunity he felt powerful enough, he'd shown me exactly what he thought they were worth. That's not bad luck. That's cause and effect, plain and simple. We teach people how to treat us, and when we stop teaching, they start assuming. I don't say that to be hard on myself for staying quiet as long as I did. I was grieving. I was lonely. I wanted very much for everything to be fine, the way you do when you've already lost one person and you can't bear to think about losing more. That's not weakness, that's being human. But there is a point where being human tips into being complicit in your own diminishment. And I crossed that line somewhere between signing the co-guarantee and sitting down on that folding chair without a word. What pulled me back wasn't anger, though there was anger. It was something quieter. It was the decision, made in a small bathroom with the fan running, to think clearly instead of just feeling. I called Harold. I called Louise. I read the paperwork I had signed. I understood what I was actually looking at, that clarity, that willingness to sit down with the hard facts of a situation instead of looking away from them. That's what gave me any real leverage at all. Feeling wronged doesn't change anything on its own. Understanding exactly how and why, and what you can actually do about it, that's what moves things. And then I had to hold to it. February was hard. There were days I almost called Fiona just to say, forget it. Let's pretend none of this happened. It would have been so much easier in the short term. But easy and right are not the same thing. And I had learned, later than I should have, but not too late, that choosing easy over and over is how you end up 63 years old on a folding chair, wondering how you got there. Fiona came back, not because I forced her, because she is, underneath everything, a woman with a conscience. And when I finally stopped absorbing the consequences of other people's choices, she had to sit with her own. That's how it works, I think. You cannot do someone else's growing for them. You can only stop making it so comfortable for them not to grow. I am not the same person I was before that Thanksgiving. I'm not sure I'd want to be. The woman who drove up to Mississauga with a pot of squash soup and a willingness to make herself small. She meant well. She loved her daughter. But she had confused love with availability and generosity with the absence of limits. Those are not the same things. They were never the same things. What I know now is that the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who don't require you to fold yourself up to fit.